Ngalakin Khadijan Nyunga Boja.
Can't hear it. Sometimes no response doesn't necessarily mean...
It's 5 people.
Hello, can anyone hear me online? Stephen Russell, can you hear me? I'm just trying to ask people one by one. Johan? Audio is unclear. Can you hear me now? Is that okay? Yep, okay. It was just too close to my mouth. It's just saturating. So I saw the microphone. So,
Yeah, normal
is
thing.
that?
Yeah.
I'm going to hold on to this for a second. Okay. Right, I'll close this.
See how that goes as well. Oh, that's right. You need
Yep.
to talk about first.
All right, folks, welcome to the lecture. I'd like to welcome Stephen Beckwith, who will be giving our guest lecture today on configuration management. Now, Stephen has been through UWA as a PhD student,
And an undergrad as well.
as a lecturer, as an undergrad. You actually taught me, do you remember
I
that?
do remember that. It's quite scary.
Probably your first year lecturing and my last year learning or something like that. Stephen's presently Manager of Engineering Operations,
Well, it's the engineering services.
Services Manager
Yeah.
at Water Corp. And he holds a lot of roles serving community, helping students into commercialization roles, etc. I'm not going to take up any more of your
No, I
time.
was
Your
gonna
bio
say-
is very long. So I'll
like that
leave
on.
it to Stephen. And
Just check the how do I tell if the online people can still hear me? Can you?
I'll
Oh, you'll monitor it down
I'll
there?
monitor it
Excellent.
there.
Okay, that's easy. All right, hopefully everyone can see the screen as well. Yeah, thanks to Lucia. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That was a very, very long time ago, which is quite scary. But yeah, I was a undergraduate student here in the 80s and then worked here as a lecturer as well. And done many different things at the moment. One of the things most related to this is I was a project manager and senior software engineer with Motorola for a while. Not a lot of you probably remember Motorola because there ain't no many Motorola phones anymore, but one of the big things relevant to this is that Motorola had a lot of various software centres all around the world. So we used to do this thing called follow the sun setup for software engineering. There was software centres in the US, in Australia, in India, in China, various places in Europe as well. And along with that comes a lot of collaboration on the same bit of code or the same bit of work. So what I'm going to talk to you today is with respect to when you're doing some form of software engineering, or any engineering to be honest, what you need to do is have a level of control over your code. So, thank you very much. So I get a bit of water as well. Much appreciated. So this is something which you might say, it's just software. It's not, actually. It's actually related to a lot of things.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, you're right. Do I have to repeat the first bit? No, I'm right. Okay. There's a lot of relevance to any sort of engineering, to be honest, and we're going through the same things at the moment about bringing a whole pile of people who are outsourced back into an organisation, and the whole question of configuration management comes up. You've got a lot of people working on the same bit of kit, be it code, be it assets, whatever the case may be, and there is a lot of confusion that can come up by people who are really trying to do the right thing, and they're trying to work on the same bit of equipment, but they can't tell everyone what they're working on. So you get people trying to do the same thing to the same bit of code or the same bit of equipment, and it becomes a bit of a mess. So you're thinking, well, it's just human nature, right? Well, one of the jobs as engineers is to actually try to minimise this kind of wastage. And it is waste, right? You're spending a lot of time trying to do the same thing to the same bit of kit, and people are just wasting stuff left, right and centre. Let me see if this... Oh, righto. I'll do it like that. Okay. So the basic overriding factor of this is the concept of successful teamwork. And you keep hearing these things, right, saying when you're working as an engineer, you've got to work in a team, but you blokes, you're all in this situation at the moment where you're being examined individually, okay? But at some point down the track, you're going to be very much judged on your ability to work in a team. And part of that is following agreed processes. Oh, there you go. It's easy. So it's probably the best one to talk about it then. Thanks, Alicia. So the concept here of how you work in a team. And one of the big things is coming for collaboration on an agreed set of principles. And configuration management is a perfect one for that. And so what I want to do is I'll go through a bit of a framework, and you've probably already seen this in different stuff you've been working on. And if you're jotting down notes, obviously the notes are going to be around with everyone, but hopefully we can interact and I can answer questions. What we're trying to do here, therefore, is to try and capture errors before they become a problem down the track. Okay, some of the best frameworks and lean principles, etc., are all about saying, how can we spend time now to make sure that error doesn't propagate down the track? And in the case of mobile phones, where I was working, you do a bit of error in a bit of code or something that's been done badly, and if you've got $75 million handsets being distributed around the world, then it's going to be a bit of a problem if you have to recall them all, right? So it's very important to get this sort of stuff right. So what I'm talking about here is this kind of stuff. I'm going to focus on software configuration management, but this is really relevant to a whole pile of fields of engineering. What is software configuration management? What's the purpose of it? And what are the different things, the activities you do as you're doing this kind of thing? Now, every different configuration management principle in a really good mature company will have some aspects of this. I happen to be talking here about the Motorola arrangements just because, well, they were pretty damn good at it. One thing Motorola wasn't too good at was innovating, and that's one of the reasons why you can't buy, well, it's pretty hard to get a Motorola phone now, and you've got an Apple, what have you. So I'll tell you a story about that as well, but anyway, that's another thing. So what is configuration management? Is the art, and it is an art, okay? There's a certain amount of science about sticking to a certain level of processes, but it's an art. It's the art of identifying, organising, controlling modifications to the software being built by a programming team. I'll let that sink in a bit, but you're thinking about modifications made either to an existing bit of kit or to a new bit of kit being created. How do you actually handle those modifications, particularly if you've got a big team of people working on it? So the idea is it's a discipline applying technical and administrative surveillance, so you're over a whole pile of people, identifying and document functional and physical characteristics of the team, control those changes, record and report changes, and verify compliance. And that's a really important thing at the end, verifying compliance. Now, each of you individually by now would be gun programmers. Okay, you can do it yourself, right? But what happens if you've got someone else who's maybe better programmer than you are, not as good a programmer, has a different style, who's working on the same bit of code? Fun and games. So what happens without it? Okay, so confusion. And by that, what I'm saying here, often the biggest frustrations of anything to do with you working on this massive project, like a new control system for an oil rig, a new treatment plant, or a new satellite control system, is the fact that poor configuration management. In other words, I'm working on this bit, someone else is working on that bit, we didn't get it right. Remember there was a particular vehicle that crashed in the surface of Mars going back probably about 15 years ago, I think. You remember that one, Delucia? One team was, yeah, it was an orbiter, yeah. One team was working on imperial measures and the other team was working on metric. But what happened was that they didn't have this sort of communication with each other in the software. So the thing just basically went straight into the ground. So fun and games. And that's really configuration management issues. So some examples you might see. You have a bug that was fixed at great expense. It was in this bit of code. That code was put somewhere in the record, and then someone else who built the final system used that old bit of code, and suddenly a bug that you thought you got rid of reappears because there hasn't been proper baselining of which code you need. Now you might say, oh, that's easy, right? It's easy if it's just yourself, but if you're working with a team of people and someone's not following the rules, suddenly it appears. Suddenly you've new developed and tested feature that you had, suddenly it's not there with a new build because the right bit of code hasn't been used, and a fully tested program suddenly doesn't work because something else has been introduced. And you're about that far away from a release, you're telling your clients, yeah, no worries, this bit of kit will be there, it'll be ready, and suddenly the night before it's all turned to mush because you've used an old bit of code in there somewhere due to configuration management issues. So, just realised there's that bit at the top. I can't get rid of that bar, can I? It's all right, don't worry. Because what's basically we're trying to say here is what we're trying to do is transfer... Well, oh, that's good. People are like it. Go online, everyone. No, I'm only kidding. Transforming projects from chaos, you've got all these different bits and pieces into some sort of order. That's the whole point of this, is to have a very, very structured way of making builds for your software and different objects. Okay, apologies for the information overload of all the bits and pieces here. So basically, you're addressing this sort of things. You've got simultaneous updates. If 2 or more people are working on the same bit of code, you've got shared code. There might be a code that someone in India is working on, someone in China is working on, someone in Adelaide is working on, and they're all using the same bit of code to do slightly different tasks that they're working on. And the big thing, release versions. And most large programs, you have evolutionary steps. Someone does this bit, someone does that bit, and you come to a concept of a release. Now, each of you would have seen a release statement that says version 1.2.3, and it lists out the components with their various versions, and there's baseline names next to it. And that is a thing when you're doing software development, that you track which bits of individual programs or individual files contribute to the greater whole of the product that you're trying to create. Common misconceptions about configuration management, that's what that says there, common misconceptions. Version control tool will do it all. You've got something like GitLab and that'll sort it all out. It'll help, but unless you've got the rules, it's a mess because people might be using it differently. You only need it on very large projects. That's not true. It's essential for every project, some level of configuration management, even when you are working things by yourself, because there's quality control when you're producing a product for a client. It's only the concern of 1 or 2 people in the team. That's rubbish. Everyone needs to be on board with how you do configuration management on a project, and you all need to sign in or collaboratively say, I will work to the following rules. So where does it come in a project? And there's a couple of terms that you may have heard and you may have not heard, but these are different phases of a standard sort of software project. You customer and you do some sort of requirements gathering. So you say, what do you want? Okay, and it's right from the start there, you start baselining which is the requirements here. Is that the agreed set of requirements? Well, yes, it is. Bang, we'll baseline that, but then someone needs to add some stuff. So you have to re-baseline that set of requirements. And it's important from the aspect of actually tracing at the end which requirements am I programming to. So can it to get that kind of level of confusion. Requirements analysis, which is the bit where someone sits down or a team of people sit down and say, right, that's a requirement, but how am I going to do it? Design, that's the actual physical, I'm going to create this in the following way. And then the coding. And what we did at Motorola, for example, is we did testing in parallel with coding. By that, I mean you're doing test planning all the way along and doing it in parallel. So we'd have a coding lead, if you like, or a design lead, or a technical lead rather, and then a test lead. And the whole time you're going, all right, fair enough, we're building it that way, but how am I going to test that? And what am I testing against? So it's these sort of concepts. So it's through the whole life cycle basically there. So what does it cover? So it covers all the following type of artefacts. Now an artefact is just simply an object or a thing that you have while you're doing your engineering. So it's some sort of engineering plan, you've got a specification, the test design, all the test cases you've created, test equipment, source code, all the executables, libraries, software support software, beg your pardon, and all the data and everything. Each and every one of them, you have to have some kind of idea of that is the one which is the agreed one. That's what we're working towards. And if someone changes it, there needs to be some sort of control over that, about why would you change it. And believe you me, it happens all the way through a project. You're at the start of a project and someone goes, oh, hang on a minute, what if we actually do the following instead? Oh, okay, fair enough, we can do that and we can add that feature, but you need to have some level of control over all your artifacts and your code and everything that says that change there, that'll affect the following things, and everyone agrees what that's going to affect and how you bring them all together to create the final product. If it's sounding at the moment like you're going, oh my goodness, there's a lot to this, yes there is. Software, it's the art of identifying Delucia, it's the identifier. That's right. Identifying, organising, controlling modifications to software being built by... It's all right, I'm just... you can get rid of that. And so it's all about removing the chaos. All these questions that can easily come up in a team of what piece of kit are we agreed we're working on. That'll do, that's fine. Jeez, thanks. Done. Oopsie. So just on the outset, I'll just do a quick little straw poll if anyone has anything at the moment that they're going about, but if not, I'll go on. But literally, that's a quick little introduction about configuration management's all about. So I understand you're working in groups at the moment, and I bet your bottom dollar that someone has already been in a situation where you've done a group project and someone's had to rework something because, oh no, I've already done that. Oh, have you? Oh, okay, well I thought I did that. Oh, okay, let's have a look at your code. Oh, you did it differently than I did. Oh, okay. So if you've seen that before, you know what we're talking about. Alrighty, can you monitor if someone online's asking questions? You think it's, cool, thanks. All right. So one of the things that when you do configuration management, generally on a project, you allocate different roles on a project, particularly if you're doing a good sizable long, couple of months long software project, develop something like a new feature on a mobile phone. One of the things I worked on going back about whenever it was when we had Motorola here was, and this is the ironic thing about the iPhone, is that we actually had iTunes on a Motorola phone. And that was the first phone that actually had that on it, so we were working on that. And it wasn't long after that that Apple went, oh, these phone things are pretty cool. I think we'll buy a stack and create our own phones, which good on them. They made a lot of money. So one of the key roles is a configuration manager. So that is the person who actually runs the show. And the configuration manager is the person from the point of view of you are the one that makes sure everyone is compliant, but you set the rules. And then you do audits all the way across to make sure that the rules are being followed. A configuration control board, what that is that when you actually say, right, the following artefacts, do we agree that this is what we're working on? Yep, okay. The configuration control board is the team that when a new request comes in, they say yes or no, we make the changes, and if we do, these are the changes need to be, and you go and do it. That kind of thing. Engineers on the project, goes without saying, and the project manager on the project is the person who is there to control cost, time, scope, and more often than not has to report up to whoever's got the budget to tell them how we're going, and is the one that gets put on the map when they're behind on any of those things, cost, time, and scope. Get used to this. All right. As I said, configuration management creates and maintains the repository, and by repository I'm talking about the, if you like, the repository. By that I mean the directory or the file or the area that says here is our agreed set of artefacts, be they designs or whatever the case may be, code or whatever. That also would include things like history as well, previous ones as well, just in case you need to go back. They document, develop and distribute the configuration management procedures. They establish those baselines and they basically control it, and they make sure that any changes are recorded and kept. And this is important, ensure that no unauthorised changes are made to baselines. So if someone goes, normally in a project, if you go and do something which you're not authorised to do so, it's the configuration manager who comes around with a big stick and basically says, why did you do that? And they convene and chair all the change control board meetings, which is a process by which you go by to say, okay, this change has been requested, what do we do about it? Do we authorise it? Okay, engineers, one of the biggest things engineers do, apart from do with the code, is to be compliant with what you are asked to do and follow the process. So, yes, coding's a thing. Yes, good coding's a thing. Rogue coding is not a good thing. Maybe the best coder around, and you might do things very, very quickly, but if someone else is working on exactly the same thing and you haven't done things according to the way things are going, you won't be very popular. So, participate in the change control boards. Project manager provides oversight for the activities and make sure they're adequately resourced. That's the other thing as well. So a good mature company will have all these in place and make sure that these processes are well and truly followed, and why would that be? Because a lot of people would say, oh, how can I possibly afford to do all this? A mature company will realise you can't afford not to. There's a really good paper written by IBM initially that said the research showed that if you make a mistake at the start of a project, if that propagates through to the end, it costs 300 times as much, this is in a software project, to actually fix it at the end, or at the bit when you're doing the release, as opposed to fixing it straight away. So that's the level of maturity, and generally it comes from a company having an awful lot of pain and making big mistakes. Okay, the board, as I said, ensures that every change to the baseline is properly considered, approves, rejects or postpones proposed changes, validates all changes and approves releases to the customer. And that's the typical of the people who are on it. This is important as well, because often there could be someone who says, I really, really have to make this change. It's going to make the feature so much better. And they're really passionate about it. And this is going to be something, oh, I can't wait to do this. It's going to be so much fun. It's really hard sometimes to let that go and say, we'll put that in at the end. Because there might be, and this is the grim reality, you may have actually had a customer who really has a priority for a certain set of features. And they're happy with, and you'll hear terms like, minimum viable product. So we'll get something over the line that just does the basics. And as an engineer, you might say, but I hate this. It's not the thing that's going to actually make this thing wonderful. Yeah, it will in the end, but we haven't got $1 million just lying around to spare for you to get your own little personal things across the line. So bear in mind, sometimes it's very frustrating being a very good technical engineer, because the things that you know will make a better product are rejected just because it's not now to do it. So, interesting thing to consider when you're working. Okay, summary. This is important. Configuration management, it's a collaborative effort involving the whole team. Any one person doesn't come on board and goes rogue and does their own thing, don't be surprised if that person won't be working there for very much longer. Okay, let's talk about the different activities we have. And I'll go into these into a little bit more detail about what each of these things are. So we're talking about, I'll go around in each one individually, but when you're doing configuration management, these are the sorts of clear processes that happen when you're working on code. Now, again, people look at this and go, I remember the first time I saw all this and say, how can you afford to have this much overhead? And I can tell you right now, it works. It really does. Complicated projects, and anything as well, has to have some level of control, because if you get to the end and you think I'm all done and there's just a mess, unteasing the mess is just really, really hard and sometimes impossible, and you have to start again. So, configuration management planning. That's when you actually say, okay, we've got this project ahead of us. How are we going to handle this? How are we going to do this? Who's doing what? What are the methods for identifying configuration items? Is this something we need to place into control? This is something, not all things have to be placed into control, but identifying what that is. Things like a file naming scheme. It might sound mundane, but having that as a agreed structure is really important as well. Change control process flow. In other words, saying this is the order we will do things in. The repository information, that's the controlled artifact, the actual configuration artifact, the repository information, just acronym falls out of my head at the moment. Configuration accounting and reporting, that's the bit where you can go and check. How are we going to go and check to make sure that we have the right configuration in the end? Now, by that, there might be as little as just having a spreadsheet that actually says, here's a list of things that we got under configuration. In a more sophisticated project, there's an automatic bit of software that is able to actually identify the file name and say, this file name and that one and that one and that one, yes, I have the correct configuration, tick box, I can actually release that. Tool-specific information, that's along the lines as if you're using particular type of software like GitLab or Rational Rose, which are software you can buy which helps you out with this sort of stuff. Configuration management activities for hardware copy items, less of that these days, but generally how much you print out and give to the customer, for example. And archival and backup procedures. What are the procedures we're going to do to archive stuff? Again, that might sound a little bit easy, and don't I have people to do that? Yes, but everyone needs to follow it. So, identification of configuration items. What's that? That's what CI is, thank you, configuration item. Each individual artefact or product, each individual bit is called one of those. Can be one or more files, can be software modules, you know, a .h, .c, .py code, whatever the case may be. And then the actual configuration item requires a unique identifier. So when you get a really good, well done configuration management setup, every file has a naming structure and you follow that. And the configuration manager will get very upset if someone types in something slightly different, because how do you control it? For example, that might be a particular file there. That's a requirements book under project such and such. It's version such and such, and might be draft KB or whatever the case may be. Basic rule, for example, files which contribute to the same functional block or feature should be grouped as one configuration item. And you might have like a bit of code, for example, everyone's done it. You've got C.H, for example, and they do the same function. You can call them the same thing because they work all together. But that's detail that you've got to agree on. Version control, so specific revision of a file or directory, and you've got different version control tools that can help you with this. So when you have a specific file, you may have previous versions of it. So you've done this with documents, it might be version 0, version A, version B. What's the structure that we're going to use? Do we agree on version 1.2.3, and what constitutes up-versioning? When do you do that and why do you do that? Basic stuff like that. Important versions can be assigned labels to indicate development milestones or configuration item approval or baselines. A baseline, by the way, and we'll get to that, a baseline is something where you say, oh, look, are we in a position where we've got a particular line in the sand that says this meets all these features? Yes, we got that. We're ready to have a temporary release, or this is something we will use for this testing purpose. I've done all my development, this person's done that function. We've got something we can now use. Great, we'll baseline that. And what baseline is when you say, this is a release, it is made up of that code, that code, that code, that code, that code, that code, and that code. Bang, boom, that's my release. Great, baseline, let's go and test it. And if during that testing you suddenly find that that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, you then put to the change control board who go, yeah, we'll have to fix that, and we'll agree to change the baseline. So that's how that works. Why is that important? Why am I doing so much work to do that? Because you might have a programmer in another overseas location, somewhere over there, someone over there, or 4 or 5 people in your same office. One's working at home this week, and the other one's not. And so they're not actually physically talking to each other, and they're in each other's pockets every 5 seconds saying, which line of code are you working on? So it is a collaborative way of working, makes life very easy. Version control, for example, you might see something like this. This is actually taken from ClearCase, Rational ClearCase I used to use, but a lot of software that you use to help with version control does this sort of thing. You might work on file module 1.c, okay? And version 0 is the first bit that says, okay, main, brackets, and really basic stuff in it. And then you put that back in and you say, I'm going to work on it, or someone else might work on it, and then they up-version it to version 1 because it's got another function in it. And then it's another function. You get to version 2 and you go, great, I'm going to use that as part of my baseline. I give that a label. And that label is say how you can build a baseline. I am going to use module 1.c, that label, to create the baseline of code from many, many different files all over the place. Baseline management, as I've already gone through this, so agreed upon point of departure after which any changes must be communicated to all parties involved. So it's essentially that. You are saying, righto, line in the sand, this is what we're going to use for the following purpose. And they're a set of configuration items and their version numbers at the time of the baseline is created. So you'll sometimes see, if you've downloaded, for example, something from the net, which is like a bit of software, it'll have a little text file next to it which lists out a whole pile of files with some hieroglyphics next to it. Well, that's the configuration baseline that says this is made up of the following items of code that have the following labels. Okay. I'm purposely not being too specific in terms of exactly how to do it because every company that does this is different in terms of this is our great way of doing it. What I'm teaching you here is more along the lines of the whole philosophy and the kinds of things you will see wherever you work. Right. That's probably a bit irrelevant anyway, but that was really talks about what are the different baseline management concepts you have. I'll get to that in a tick. Oh, where are we? Oh yeah, that's right. That's the typical baseline type, so that's what this is. So largely you might actually say, when do I create a baseline? Well, I'm doing a baseline because it's some sort of basic functions. I've got basic functions, so you call that a functional baseline. It's a planning baseline, so you may have just have planning with a whole heap of written documents to say, I'm going to build the following. Might be a requirements baseline. In other words, you've said, all my requirements, do we agree on all these requirements? Well, let's baseline those files. That's our agreed requirements. And if someone changes them, then you go, okay, we're going to go in and change them. Product baseline speaks for itself. A release baseline, that's the important thing. Developmental configuration, something that might be happening halfway through the process. You might say, well, let's just sit it there because we need to test that, and there's testing one. An environment baseline may actually be along the lines of saying, well, you may have created something which uses this type of support equipment or this type of code, and then someone comes along and says, oh, hang on a minute, I'm going to change the configuration management software you have, or I'm going to change the type of product the thing that goes into. So you might go from this level phone to that phone. So you create a different environment baseline that says that's for this type of computer or that type of phone, that's for that one. That one might be for Macintosh, that one might be for a normal PC. So management of baselines, oopsie, we jumped it there. As I said before, selecting the configuration elements to include in each baseline type and striking new baselines in agreed time after approved changes. So this is where the change control board comes in. You say, I've got a baseline, do we need to change it? Well, yeah, we're going to have to because there's all these new requirements that have come up, or we've got a new environment we've got to go into, like someone has said from marketing, we need to now put it in a Macintosh, or someone else has said, oh, it doesn't work at the moment for Chrome, so I've got to create a new version of this for Chrome or a new version for Internet Edge, or whatever the case may be. So yes, we need to create a new baseline. And baseline management, that's where they basically sit. So at different parts of the project phase. So if you're wondering what on earth those acronyms are at the top, and for those of you who haven't worked it out yet, engineering and software engineering particularly is full of acronyms. So requirements gathering and planning, requirements analysis is RA, design, code, unit integration, system test release, and unit integration might be that bit where you say, I've got this little particular type of code, I'm going to that's a unit, and I'll integrate that somehow. So all of configuration management, while we said covers the whole lot, they're the different baseline types that you actually might see. So that really explains what I was trying to explain before. So you'll hear all these names at some point during your career. Change management? All right. You'll hear the name change management all the time, and change management is different things to different people. For example, at the moment, there's a real thing about having a change manager in your company. There's actually a job you can have called a change manager. That's not necessarily the same as software change management, because often what you'll find is that change management is more related to people's acceptance of a project or people's acceptance of a major change in a business. So you'll go into a meeting and say, oh, this is about change management, great. Put your software engineering hat on, and you're talking to a whole pile of HR people who are basically there saying, oh, our people have change fatigue. We need to have a change manager. And when you get to the bottom of it, you realise what they're doing is training for people and what have you. So you'll hear the word change management used all the time. What I'm talking about here is how to manage change within an engineering project, and specifically using the example of a software engineering project. So literally, this is under the auspices of the change control board, that concept of, and this shows this little flow chart here. Do we have a need for a change? Yeah, well, let's a change request, a CR, change request is generated. There's some preliminary investigation done. What does it mean? The change control board reviews it based on the concept that's come from the preliminary investigation. Yes, we agree this is an important thing to do. Gives it to a developer, they do it, change control board says, yeah, well done, and then go back to the requester and say it's in there and here's your new baseline, for example. If it's no, not now, go back to the requester and say, thank you very much, we might do that later. Come back later. So that's the kind of just basic level of how you control change within a software. But don't be confused. That's probably the wrong word. This is a lot of work. There's several meetings in there, and that could take days or weeks. So different tools allow you help. They'll mention Git, Rational ClearQuest, DDTS is another one, NATS, GitLab, GitHub. Oh, I mentioned that twice anyway. There's software that helps you do those processes. Configuration status accounting. You're thinking, hang on a minute, I'm doing engineering. Where did the accounting part come into this? It's all right. Don't worry. This is accounting for all the parts of the complete product. So you're making sure that when you're building a product or building a baseline, you are using all the things that you said you would, and you are not missing anything that you said you would. So it's really accounting for all the parts. It's a bit like when you take apart a motor and you go back, put it back together, and there's a few bolts left. So you don't really want that. And then the question comes in is, when you do this exercise, if there's bits left over and it's still working, why were they there in the first place? So, but that's the analogy, if you like. So record keeping activities that gives the configuration manager visibility. So there's a bit of effort in this to actually have someone audit all your programming artifacts and make sure that you've got them included, they're the right versions, etc. And that is the thing, someone has to do that. So primary output is called the Configuration Status Accounting Report, or CSAR we used to call them. And that's basically a report that shows all the baselines and the configuration items. And that's the report that comes out and says this baseline is made of the following things and the following versions. It's got some sort of ability to be able to highlight which of those has been changed in this current version, and it lists any currently open change requests and the affected baselines. So it might say, here's our baseline, but there's things that we're still working on, for example. They're supposed to be produced regularly and stored to maintain a record of project progression as well. So you could do them at a baseline, or you can do them at any time. The project manager could say, I need a report to say how we're going at the moment. And that's some sort of accounting record. Looks like that. And come on, people would have seen this before. When you've downloaded something, you have this really great big list of stuff and what the versions are and where their directory are, for example. Okay, auditing. Okay, this is done by the configuration manager. Really, this is all about sort of checking to include that you're doing the process right and that everyone's doing the process right. So whenever you hear anyone talk about, oh, we're going to have an audit, and all these people are a bit worried, you've got to get over that, because auditing is good. Okay, yeah, a good auditor will never come around and smack anyone over the head. A good auditor will say, yeah, well done, you've missed out on this and you missed out on that. And in a really good team where you've got really good communication and really good trust amongst each other, then the auditor is your friend, okay? And your auditor's not there to tell you off. Unfortunately, some auditors you meet might actually think that, but really that's the concept of what auditing is there for. So, for example, the configuration manager might actually want to go and verify the traceability of code. Now, what that means is that when you're actually coding something, there should be labels through it to be able to say, okay, I've just done this following bit of code. There's something there that I've worked on. All right, do I have a linkage to where that was in the design documentation? Do I have a linkage to where that was in an SRS as the software requirements specification? Do I have a linkage back to the original requirement? Such that when you're coding on something, you can actually say, it was that originally a requirement to which I am coding for. So an audit can actually do that level of accounting is the wrong word, auditing, to be able to say, I am working on this bit of code which traces right back to that requirement, and vice versa. I am doing this little bit of code. All right, to what requirement is that? Well, there ain't one. Well, why are you doing it? And people will do that. They'll go and do something because it's a nice thing to do, but it wasn't in the requirement. And that's a source of errors. And you can actually put something in the code which inadvertently affects something else, which breaks something of an original requirement. You just thought it was a good idea. So a good audit will pick that up, that you're working on something you didn't need to, or shouldn't have. And that's what auditing is all about in terms of some of this stuff as well. Similar sort of thing here as well in terms of functional configuration auditing. That's where you're varying traceability of the requirements to the test as well. So am I testing for this requirement? And have I got the test code right, which actually goes back to a physical list of describing what the test code is going to do. So this is an important thing as well, is when you're working on a bit of kit that you want to give to a client, you spend a lot of time, in fact Motorola used to spend 30% of its time working on test code. So you'd have 30% as much test code as it was with the original code you were writing, because you wanted to make sure that what you delivered was free of defects. So you'd spend a lot of time on test code, things that were actually there to test different bits and pieces. And that'll be the case in control systems you might do as well, a control system for an industry or a car manufacturer or whatever the case may be. Here's the code which is going to go on the final product, but here's this test code that tests it to make sure it's going to work. So you've got to make sure that you're writing that properly as well. Release management, I've already mentioned that before as well. Group of activities ensure all the releases to the customer are complete. You can reconstruct them at any time. And this is a big part of being a configuration manager as well, is when you do a release, you've got to put your hand on your heart and say, what I'm giving the customer is what they asked for. It meets all the requirements. I've met all the software requirements, the specifications. I've met the design. That's the product. I know it works because I've traced it all. And it's not just just chuck the thing out there and see if the customer comes back and complains. So, and from my own personal experience, when I first started under this system, I thought, what a lot of overhead this is. Very complicated software project I worked on, went to the customer, I was waiting for the phone calls that said this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. Everything was right. And it's a massive, really complicated project, but it worked because of this type of level of oversight and auditing on what you're trying to do. Backupping and archiving, ensure configuration management repository is regularly backed up and secured. This is important as well, because 12 months later someone will come down the track and go, loved it, I want another version of that. And you're going, where was that code again? Got to be put away in a good, safe repository and easily can be brought up again 12 months down the track, for example. So, what I've tried to do here, and I've done it quickly, I don't know, I'm going for time actually, too easy. Tried to go through here, geez, that's not bad, isn't it? Pretty close. Tried to go through all the different configuration management activities you will see. It's not detailed to the point where this is how you do it exactly, because you'll go to a company and they'll use GitLab, or this one will use Rational Rows, and this one will do it with this type of software, and therefore we do it the following way. Warning, you will also go and work for companies that will go, what's configuration management? Personal experience from the man in the front row. And in the end, when something goes wrong, what's it like? Yeah. Half the time you don't know things have actually gone wrong. And then when something does go wrong, it's like, Righto. All right, that's actually the last bit, so I'm quite happy to, it's not too bad timing, quite happy to, assuming that's right, quite happy to open the floor if there's any questions or anything online that may have come up. Yep. Anyone here? Come on, I've seen some really attentive faces, thanks for...
Yeah, so like you were talking about, with companies that already have this in place, they have their system they know what to do. With companies that, or even like, an industry group that is doing it for the first time, right? Are they making these all from scratch? Generally, like they almost bring someone in to help them set it up, or it seems like, on an individual level, if you were to work for a company and they said, "This is how we do it," that's easy to follow. But if you're trying to set it up yourself, then that's a lot of things.
Yeah, agreed. And if you've got a small company, a lot of people will use a lot of Jira products, for example, or GitLab type stuff to start somewhere. Again, it's the level of maturity of the company. And what tends to happen is that you go to a company that may be just starting out, might be a startup or something like that, and they're needing to rush towards a minimum viable product. And they won't even look at this sort of stuff because they need to get something out there. What you tend to see is this sort of stuff becomes important at a company that's bled all over the floor somewhere. They've released a product, it's had some faults in it, and the customer's taken them to the cleaners. Yeah. So sometimes you need to go through a lot of that pain to actually realise that, oh heck, I actually need this level of oversight over what I'm creating. So some others will say, oh, I've had past experience with that, I need to go and do that right from the outset. And I guess one of the points of having a forum like this and for me to come in and tell you about it is to talk to you about my past experiences where, you know, we should have a little bit of level of control over all this stuff we're doing. And sometimes you go and work for a company where your new boss might say, I'm not doing any of that. Okay, keep that in the back pocket. And potentially say, well, maybe we could do this. Oh, that's a good idea, and introduce it slowly. But from personal experience, you really see this level of oversight when it comes from a company that had some real pain. And by real pain, I mean almost like, you know, they've been taken to court, or, you know, they've been not paid for a particular job because it didn't meet the requirements, for example.
Okay.
Does that sort of answer your question?
That does.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't, like you said, I guess a startup doesn't, this isn't what's on startup's mind.
Well, generally not, because I mean, if I've worked at a couple of startups as well, they're all about minimum viable product. And quite often I talk to someone that says, oh, you know, we do releases, and incremental releases, which is all fine and dandy until the incremental release, you've made a mistake that was an incremental release 4 times back again, it's just reappeared again. And so what you tend to find is that because in startups there's a rush and a desperate worry to try and get something out as quick as you can, they'll try and do something initially, and then it's the next 6 months about they've got a product that's sticking now, or how they're going to control it and they maintain their customers. So that's not to say that a good startup won't have some level of control at the initial, but it does tend to be out, not front of mind for a lot of those companies. Anyone else from? Yeah.
So this is great for businesses, but fundamentally, individuals need to adopt kind of all of these practices. I mean, I try and release software, and I do maybe 3 of these. So where's my guide that says, look, you know, if it's just you starting out, here's a good template that you could use. You know, can you recommend a book? Can you recommend a checklist? Because there's a mindset that you need that kind of the slides don't help with. You know, I need to go right. So for example, none of my projects ever start off very big. Right? I'll just open up a file. I'll write a bit of code, open up a file, do something, and then close it again. That's all. I don't need to give it a version number. I don't need to do any of that stuff, right? And then like 5,000 lines later, I go, it's out of control.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what do? I have to scrap it all and start again from scratch.
Yeah.
Advice.
So, because things have come a long way in the last few years in terms of how good some of the software is to allow you to do that. So, at a risk of sounding like I'm a marketing person for a particular type of software, but it's probably a bit easier because Git, for example, is something which is free. Yeah, Git's a great starting point.
Archiving and it ticks the version control, but you know it
doesn't do the whole lot necessarily.
I mean,
Yeah. So look, I'll put my hand up and tell you straight away that I've taken this from my past experience from companies that do this because they have to. So a lot of this work here is stuff that I've collated from different past experience. So I will say, resource 1 is this, and that's a good start. Things like Git, for example, can get people started on saying, well, how do I use Git? How do I use that particular type of software to help me with this? And like you said, it can pick up a few of these. In terms of some of the others, you know, each one of them, I'd sort of counsel, even from the point of view of researching each one individually, to actually see how that can help you in your particular application. Because more often than not, what will happen is that, well, as an example, for Motorola, where I was there, I could walk into the office in Hyderabad, which I did a few times, and they use exactly the same systems of what we used in Adelaide, or what we used in Sydney, or what we used in Perth, or what was using in Sunnyvale in the US, because they were very strong in saying, this is how we do stuff. So they had all their documentation themselves, and I worked on a lot of that, worked on a lot of things for different companies I worked with as well. So I have to admit that I've collated it from different experience. in terms of some of the more recent documentation, I found Git to be a pretty good resource just from the point of view of how to use it.
Yeah.
Bits and pieces like that.
And the same, I think, problem exists in the individual where rather than working in a team, I work for me 5 years from now. If I don't have some kind of standard, when I go back through my records, I have no idea what I've done.
Spot on.
And
Yeah.
so that, to some degree it's just, I work on creating a template and then I try and reuse that template so I know at least what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's not just software. So if I'm doing
Drawings.
design,
Yeah, absolutely.
if I'm doing a SolidWorks design, and if I don't start from a base template that says I'm going to create a folder, I'm going to name it like this,
Absolutely agree. And to the point of things like, like you might be an oil and gas company, a mining company that says, how are we going to maintain the records of how our assets are configured? I maintain drawings, for example. I have 3D models of it. But how do I, rather than have the person have to drive out to site to go and check it out each time, where's my records of that? And the way in which you hold those records are the way to do it. So sometimes even looking at things like records management type stuff for asset management. And in asset management, there are some excellent operational asset management documentation which refer to these kind of practices as well. So anything along those lines, researching something like operational asset management, has those kinds of references as well. If that can help. So
does anyone here have any experience where they've come to a process, figured out this is how I do stuff? No.
That's good, you can use this.
No.
Surely someone could have code for fun.
Brilliant. Brilliant. No, this is great. This means that we've got a group who we're just going to go, you're going to have so much fun in the next years when you come a cropper for the first time. Seriously, has anyone done any work experience on a mine site? Industrial site? Anyone worked on a PLC code?
I didn't work on PLC, but I did have an internship from my company.
Yep.
And I wasn't doing any coding, but I was part of asset management, and I can really relate to the importance of record keeping, because part of what I had to do was kind of like auditing
Yep.
past incidents.
So for those persons listening online, the comment there was just about working on asset management at industrial sites and the record keeping associated with the assets. And yeah, drawings, right? Documents describing the asset. Is this up to date against that, etc. And if I was going to have a project, and this is a classic one I hear all the time, a project comes along that needs to upgrade an asset, they go, okay, let's have a look at your most recent drawings. Oh, they're all out of date. It happens all the time. And guess what? It costs a bomb to go out there and have a look, to check things out. One of the interesting things I went to recently is the idea now of having like holographic or walk-through representation of three-dimensional models to be able to go through and say, this is a good record of the asset now, for example. I've seen virtual reality and worked on for a while, virtual reality walkthroughs, which were based on an up-to-date 3D model of your asset, with links to, I'll click on that there in the picture, and that's a particular level measurement device, so that's a pressure transmitter, or that's this. And the classic one I saw recently was a gas platform, where because they'd spent so much money on people having to fly out to the gas platform, and that involves flying up to a particular town in the northwest of Australia, which I won't necessarily give away, and then you get on a helicopter. It costs thousands of dollars for each trip to go out and check whether